Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Pricing, the official podcast of the Professional Pricing Society. I'm Kevin Mitchell from PPS, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. In this episode, we're going to dive into a topic that is very relevant as artificial intelligence, AI, continues to shape the business world and the world of pricing and revenue management and related fields. As businesses increasingly turn to AI, for pricing decisions, for business decisions, the question will arise, where does human expertise fit into this equation? And today I'm very, very happy that we are going to be joined on Let's Talk Pricing with Matt Knaggs. Matt is the Senior Business Value Lead at Zilliant. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, really excited to be here, Kevin, and excited to talk about a topic that I'm super passionate about.
All right. And of course, we have a lot of questions, a lot of information coming in from all over the place about AI. So, Matt, thank you very, very much. I know that you're an expert in this area. So, we are going to ask you to clear some things up for us. We'll start with a couple of discussion questions from our audience here. So, Matt, first of all, to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit more about the role of artificial intelligence, AI, in pricing today and how it's reshaping traditional pricing strategies?
Yeah, and to cover that, I think it's important to talk about the context of kind of today through the lens of what happened before today. Because I think we're starting to see where people, when they say AI today, what they're typically referring to is generative AI, right? Ever since ChatGPT exploded on the scene, and since then we've got all these other transformer models, deep learning models, and uh, these new generative AI tools. When we say AI, that's what first comes to mind. But there are all these different categories of AI, many of which have been around for decades and decades, right? Technically going all the way back to the late 1940s, early 1950s. And in the world of pricing, we've seen machine learning and algorithmic pricing for decades. That's not new in the world of pricing. What's starting to change, what's getting more exciting is the ability for people to partner with generative AI in their day-to-day to look at pricing within their organization to identify opportunities in ways in which previously they've been unable to do so. So with that traditional pricing approach through machine learning, AI, that is what we would consider deterministic AI, meaning we've got calculations and algorithms and rules that are going to ensure reliable, consistent outcomes over time. So we build pricing models based on that approach, and we can expect the same results over and over again, given identical inputs. Now, when we shift to generative AI, we're no longer in that realm of deterministic, but we're in probabilistic AI. What that means is that these generative AI models, what they're doing is they're taking all of the available context, so data that they've been trained on, and then they are coming up with a output based on what they believe to be the most probable correct answer. And so that is going to lead to a lot of what we're talking about, Kevin, in terms of where do humans come in? Because given the natural language abilities of Gen AI can be very convincing, very believable. Like, oh man, that's a great answer. I'm just going to run with that. And there's a risk in doing that without having some level of human interaction to validate and inform what the actual final decision should be relative to pricing. And really, there are still limitations and gaps when it comes to generative AI in pricing. If you think about it from a data-driven approach, we can only use the data available to us in order to make a decision. So if we're feeding data into any kind of pricing model, whether that be the traditional type that's deterministic and rules-based, or this more generative approach, probabilistic. Even so, there may be other data points that would be what we would call blind spots. If we're thinking about external influences, right now, tariffs are a hot topic, right? Do you actually have data flowing into whatever model you're using that's going to leverage the current information available around what's happening on the tariff side of the world in order to inform what your prices should be? And more often than not, in fact, I have not yet found a company that is saying, yeah, we've got real-time information coming in right now where we can incorporate that readily, right? That's where humans come into play as one example, because they have the additional context, experience, and intuition that is going to help them make the right decision for their business.
Understood. And that's a very key point. And thank you for your description of how we've gone from deterministic to probabilistic with some of these models. And Matt, you probably know, but one of the great old pricing examples of a more deterministic, more of an algorithm within pricing is there was a textbook. I think it was called The Life of the Fly or something like that. And if you've been around pricing, you may have heard this example before.
Classic story.
A classic story. But basically, this ordinary textbook that probably a few hundred people on the planet even care about, at one point was priced at several $1,000,000 on Amazon because Amazon had a model that basically took the Barnes and Noble or a competitor's price and said, we're Amazon, we're going to go 1 or 2% over that price. But that competitor had an algorithm that said, we're going to match Amazon's price. And of course, it became this self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating thing where the next thing you know, this textbook that probably was worth 50, 100 bucks at most went for 2 point whatever $1,000,000. So it's interesting how we've seen the development in AI and things there. But we still, obviously, as you mentioned, do need those human guidelines and rules. And we know game theory, we know how other humans may react. And also all of this comes into play. So that's a very good description there. And Matt, I want to ask and also want to mention one other thing. So the next PPS conference in Dallas from May 6th, very, very excited that you're going to join us for a keynote where you're going to talk about some of these things here. So in your upcoming presentation with us, in your upcoming keynote, you're going to talk about how human pricers, how we as human beings can complement AI tools using strategic thinking, interpersonal skills, game theory, some of these human intuitions and human knowledges that the AI-driven pricing decisions probably can't do on their own. So can you give us some examples of how we as human beings, how this human element that we possess can enhance AI-driven pricing decisions?
Yeah, definitely. First, I gotta go back to your textbook example, and I'm gonna use that as kind of like a double pun, right? Because it's a classic example,
Yes.
And it's literally about a textbook.
Right.
So a shameless plug for our ethics and bias in Gen AI course that was recently put to the PPS AI certification program as well that I did, and I used that exact example, right? And at the heart of that example is one of the things that's really important moving forward in this ever-changing world of AI. And that is the need for what's called now, because people want to sound cool and use acronyms, HITL, which means human in the loop, right? And the idea there is that even with the best conceived ideas around what an AI model should be doing, and we think we've set up all the correct parameters and boundaries, we still have to ensure accountability for what comes from these models. And so still we need, even with as fancy as AI is getting, we need a human in the loop. And the idea there is that in that textbook example, a human, had they been aware of what was going on, would have said, oh my gosh, we can't sell a book for $1 million, or I think it got up to 17 million or something like that, if I recall, before they actually caught the issue and stopped it, right? So ensuring that humans maintain decision accountability and steer the ethical usage of AI and set the correct boundaries. That even means once I've got a model set up, I still need a human to oversee that and ensure it's actually doing what I expect. Now, not only that, but humans have a specific set of skills that, at least today, AI does not yet have. Now, AI can imitate some of those skills with the latest model from ChatGPT, OpenAI, by the way, 4.5. They're even touting that it's more empathetic, right? But even that empathy that comes through the model is still programming, and it's not actual, real human empathy. It's impressive the way these models are maturing and developing over time. But we have not yet reached a point in our collective society where we're saying, yes, that empathy, for instance, is enough. It's valid if it's coming from the machine. I'm going to say that carefully because I don't want 20 years from now a machine to point to this interview and say, how dare you, Matt? But just acknowledging our reality today, we haven't evolved to the point of embracing that yet as a replacement for human interaction. And so when we talk about empathy as an example, it's a soft skill. Many years ago, people might have said, you don't need empathy in business. But what's often referred to as the last mile in pricing, which is how we actually execute based on here's our pricing strategy, here's the pricing that we're putting in front of our sales team. Sales team is then expected to carry that across the line to the customer. Well, when my sales team comes back to me and they say, you know what? Yeah, you've given us this price, but here's why in this particular situation, it's not going to work. If I can't respond to that with my actual humanity, right? Even if ultimately we're going to have some debate and I'm going to say, no, we are still going to go with this, that's going to do a lot to erode the trust that's there, right? And that's critical. If we want our pricing strategy to actually be able to be realized in the day-to-day, we've got to ensure that there's trust. And trust only comes from being able to have those real human interactions where we're going to have an honest conversation. We can show that we understand the challenges being brought to us. And I think I said at the start of this, if not, I meant to, if we get to the point where we say, well, I hear you, Mr. Sales Guy, but AI said this is the price, so it's the price. Well, then we've completely gone off the rails. And I don't see a point ever where we're going to be able to take humans completely out of the situation to where that level of validation, both from an emotional, empathetical standpoint, is no longer required. And also validation to be able to say, well, based on my experience, here are the things that I'm seeing, not what Gen AI is telling me, but here's what's happening in the market. Can we agree on those things? Okay, here's what's happening in your particular case with this customer. Let's talk about how that impacts the prices that we're putting in front of them. And being able to show that I'm not just somebody taking what was presented to me and saying, copy paste that into reality, but I can at least explain it, justify it, validate it, or say, you know what, maybe you're onto something. Maybe there's an additional piece of context here. And we need to either fine tune the model, we need to make a rules-based exception for this particular case, and that can be incorporated into the model. But that level of understanding that you're only going to get from a human pricer with actual experience and strength of those human characteristics, that will continue to be relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. And some key things that you so eloquently put out in that is that as pricers, we have to be artists and scientists. It's never one or the other. We also have to use empathy and sympathy and talk with our internal teams, as you mentioned, talking with sales teams in a language that they can understand. And the AI said the price is 2.3 million, 16 million for this book is not a language that anyone with any real knowledge could understand. So we definitely have to have that in there. We have to be able to relate with our colleagues, be they inside our company, be they our senior management, be they our marketplace, our customers, or whomever, on terms that they can understand, that they can relate with. We have to use those human nuances, those ways of basically using our language in order to make that connection with them. Another question for you. You are going to discuss some other things in your presentation with us. So you're also going to talk about how to build trust in AI recommendations across cross-functional teams. So what are some ways that companies can foster confidence in these AI tools and get different teams to align on pricing strategies?
Yeah. Today, I see a lot of organizations taking many different approaches or almost taking what I'll call a no approach, right? Because there's so much uncertainty around not only what's out there today, but also what tomorrow looks like. It's almost every day, it seems like there's news dropping about some huge advancement in the world of AI or quantum processing or all these things, which, are developing at a pace unlike anything we've seen in the past. And so one of the things that's critical to establishing trust is first adopting an AI strategy as a company and communicating that to everyone, right? Because for many people, there is already this fear of AI is coming for my job, right? That has been stated for quite some time. Now you're hearing more people saying, no, AI is not coming for your job. Humans who leverage AI are coming for your job. Okay, there may be some truth to that as well, but the idea is if I want to create trust, first, I've got to have confidence and lack of fear on my own part. So where does that come from? It comes from starting to get exposure. If I'm not using AI today, then part of my strategy organizationally should be, how do I begin to train my employees on what I think they should be learning from an AI perspective and getting them more comfortable with it? Because we often fear what we don't know or what we don't understand. And what can work really well to build trust is to start to find opportunities for quick wins with leveraging some of these newer AI tools. Now, I would recommend starting with lower risk quick wins, right? We don't want to start out the gate with, hey, let's create a brand new pricing model using generative AI and it'll be safe. A/B testing. We're only going to do half of our customers on that new model. Don't do that, right? That's not okay. What I mean is really starting small. And that might be through analytical capabilities. That might be through brainstorming. I mean, Gen AI in particular is great for what's often referred to as thought partnership. I've got this hypothesis that there may be a better way to do something within my pricing approach. So I'm going to download everything that's in my brain into this Gen AI tool and have a brainstorming session to either validate or invalidate my theory as much as I can. Now, again, part of the training needs to focus on understanding the difference between Gen AI and deterministic AI. So that means that even in these brainstorming sessions, which can be very powerful and useful, it's still a probabilistic response that you're getting. And these responses do have a high degree of accuracy, but there's also the potential for what's called hallucinations from these Gen AI models, where the Gen AI model doesn't really know, but it's been programmed to give a convincing response. And so it gives you something that sounds great. And without validating whether or not that is something you should run with, there's a risk. So understanding as a part of training that even Gen AI, as great as it is, still has its gaps and still has hallucinations, although to a lesser degree today than 2 years ago. That's something that's really important. Outside of that, looking for organizational usage through, I'll say, cross-functional alignment. So we see in some companies where they're starting to have like an AI council, and there's representation from different functional areas talking about, hey, what are the opportunities for us to leverage new AI tools within our respective areas, and then also potentially cross-functionally. And the more exposure we start to give to the rest of the organization around what we're planning to do, how it's going to impact individuals within the company, and how they can reskill or upskill so that way they're ready for these changes that come. That'll do a lot to improve the trust overall, I'll say, in their company's approach. But then there's still the trust in AI itself. And that only comes from actual adoption and usage, and importantly, explainability. That explainability piece looks really different if we're talking about machine learning, algorithmic AI models, or if we're talking the probabilistic Gen AI models. And so to improve the trust in those, it's still relatively the same approach. And that is a before and after session, we'll say, where, hey, here's what the model was predicting. So here's how we responded, and here were the results. So when we look at that over time and see the intended consequences actually happening, that does a lot to build the trust of the AI tools that we're using as well. Now, that's not always going to happen. It may be, here was the intended consequence that we were after. It didn't happen. And without an understanding of why, then there is risk of trust erosion in the AI. So that goes back to that training and knowledge on the tools that you're using and the types of technology you're using, because more often than not, if the outcome you're after didn't happen, if someone is really experienced both in the realm of AI and also we're talking specifically around pricing, they're going to be able to say, look, everybody, it's not that this AI tool is broken. Here's what we missed. We didn't include these very important pieces of context that would have helped us arrive at a different conclusion. Or there were these other external factors, a huge supply chain disruption or a new entry into the market that wasn't a part of what we built into this. And so the explainability portion will always come down to, I think, a human validating and being able to explain, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. If we don't have that, you can scroll YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn for Gen AI sucks. Look at the question I asked and look at what it gave me. And you'll get nerds like me saying, here's why you got that response. Here's how you could prompt better to get a better response. But that's an example of a skill set that is going to be growing more and more in importance. The more that we're looking to leverage this technology, the more that we're going to have to be aware of the ways in which we can best interact with the technology.
That's very interesting. And I like how your descriptions about AI recommendations and how we can get everyone aligned on AI-driven pricing decisions. A lot of that matches up pretty closely with some of the well-known pricing strategies and tactics that we've been talking about for a long time. And many of these will not be a surprise to people in our audience. In particular, when you talked about you don't start with an A/B test where you're going to have 50% doing A, 50% doing B, and compare and contrast there. That's very similar to the classic pricing strategy of when you have a brand new pricing incentive or a pricing strategy. Basically, to use an American example, we might start geographically with Rhode Island and see how it works in a smaller territory, and then extrapolate that, multiply that, and see what the effects might be for California, Texas, for a larger state. For our friends in EMEA, I'll make up an example. We'll start testing this in Luxembourg, and then we'll try the EU5, France, Germany, the UK, Italy, and Spain, and so on and so forth there. So it's very interesting how, even with this new tool and with this new knowledge, a lot of, as how you've mentioned, a lot of the human intuition, the human empathy, sympathy, that thought processes and things like that still apply when you're going to do testing and when you're going to try to use this as a tool in order to help with your strategies and tactics there. We are running a little short on time, so we will have, how about one more question here? As businesses look to implement AI in their strategies, what are some of the key steps they should take to ensure that the AI outputs align with their broader business objectives and their long-term success?
So there are a couple of things that I would recommend, and one is ensuring that we're not doing AI just for the sake of AI, right? Right now, you're seeing where it's almost a mandate in any kind of 10K quarterly earnings call, anything like that, where companies have to be calling or calling that out, that that is something strategically that they're tackling, or else their investors will be in a tizzy, right? So if we're doing AI, we have to have a clear purpose for it and ensure that it aligns to the overall strategic goals of our organization. Not only that, but there's a lot of challenge right now in being able to actually measure the KPIs around whatever we've done from an AI perspective. So it's just as important that not only are we aligned to our organizational strategic goals, but that before we set out on implementing some new AI approach, that we've aligned on what are the metrics by which we're going to measure success. Because just to do it and to be able to point back and say we did it is not going to be very helpful, right? It doesn't confirm for us that it was something that we should have done. So we have to start with the outcome in mind. And that's going to help us to identify the measures, the KPIs that will help us determine how effective we actually were. We also need to really differentiate between the various AI approaches we can take. Are we going to use deterministic AI? Are we going to use probabilistic AI? Or will it be a blend? Because the reality is we've got well-established history that shows there's a lot of validity in that deterministic AI. That traditional algorithmic-based approach to pricing is still valid. So we don't just throw that out the window and say, Gen AI is so exciting and it's new and it's great, so it's better. The truth is, it's not better in all aspects of where we might apply AI. So you have to be very measured in your approach on where do I use which one, and then how do I ensure that human accountability factor, ensuring that I've got a human in the loop for any type of process that I'm using, because that's ultimately going to also impact my governance to, if we're talking within the context of pricing, my ethical usage, right? The monitoring of, risk or even the risk of customer perception. If we just let a new pricing model run unconstrained, and then the customers that we have look at the prices we put in front of them and say, ooh, I don't know that that was the right approach to take. We can actually have a really negative impact on our brand perception if we are just running hands-free without humans in the loop. So yeah, all of that. And then just underscoring continual learning and training, right? That's where it really needs to begin. I've heard some companies say we're waiting to start until things level out and there's more certainty about what's coming. Those companies will be at a disadvantage in the future because things are changing. They're not going to slow down. They're not going to stabilize anytime soon. So even for those companies that are saying we're waiting, well, let's say whatever that future point is 2 years from now, and they say, okay, now we're ready. They're at a 2 year disadvantage because in addition to using whatever's available today, they're going to have that lack of skills from having interacted with those tools, from those approaches that they could have been upskilling themselves on up until that point. So the biggest takeaway is don't wait to get started. Dive in, become familiar, get experience, and continue to learn about what is available because this is an ever-changing field and there will be new use cases, new application where human creativity is going to say, you know what? Nobody's talking about this, but we could use this particular type of AI to do this. And at the end of the day, that human expertise, creativity, critical thinking is going to drive, I think, the most impact for how we can use AI moving forward.
Understood. And Matt, thank you so much for our insightful conversation. I would imagine that some of our listeners are going to want to hear a lot more from you on this. So everyone, please reach out to Matt Knaggs at Zilliant for more information. And also, we look forward to seeing you very soon in May at the PPS Profitable Conference. We're going to be in Dallas from May 6th to 9th. And Matt, your keynote is entitled Pricers Assemble, Defending Humanity in a World of AI. So we're looking forward to that as well. Can you tell us briefly about some of the things that you're going to be talking about with us when you join us in Dallas in May?
Yeah. So we'll be looking at the current landscape and what some of the predictions are, just looking at 5 years ahead of now. The World Economic Forum took place in January. A lot of the discussions there are around the economic impact and the impact to the jobs landscape as the result of everything going on within the realm of AI. So we're going to be looking at some of those trends. We're going to be talking about how does that actually apply to pricing professionals specifically, and what are the key things that pricing professionals need to know to navigate the ever-changing world. So I'll be using as many practical examples as I can, as well as personal examples that hopefully the audience will find relatable, with stories from my own world as well. And then plenty of, I'll say, probably dad jokes and sci-fi movie references, and hopefully a little bit of humor as well, to keep things fun and engaging.
Yeah, we're looking forward to some great information about AI, about humans can partner essentially with AI and how we are still needed for a lot of things that we talked about earlier. And of course, we're looking forward to a couple of great dad jokes and sci-fi references. So everyone, please join us at PPS Profitable in Dallas from May 6th to 9th. You can always reach out to me with more details about this conference, about our other offerings, about the AI certification that Matt and his team have helped us develop as well, in conjunction with quite a few other experts in the field. And for our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to keep pricing smart and stay ahead of the curve. And we are looking forward to seeing everyone soon. Thanks, everyone.